Next, hot historians, we're going to take notes on the American Revolution. More specifically, we're going to take notes about the acts of the American Revolution. First, we're going to start with the French and Indian War. You do not have to copy this down. This is just a simple review. Remember, we said it only lasted 7 years. French fought against the colonists and the British over the land. Many Indians fought on the side of the French. The British and the colonists won. And this changed the thinking of the colonists. They started to think that we have military experience now. We can start kind of acting independent. And this also caused the British, King George III in particular, to start putting taxes and changing things because of the French and Indian War. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's start with the Proclamation Line of 1763. If you remember what this is, you do not have to write this down, but remember we kind of talked about this as well. So King George told all of the colonists that they could not settle past the Appalachian Mountains. So they said, okay, here are the Appalachian Mountains. Do not cross this line. And the reason why, he wanted to control the colonists, and he didn't want to continue to protect them from the natives. So after the war, he said, you know what, in order to keep control and not give you this protection, do not cross the line. Now, if you were a colonist, would you be mad if King George III told you, do not cross this line? Do not pass the Appalachian Mountains. I can't control you if you pass the Appalachian Mountains, and I don't really want to protect you from the Native Americans if you pass this line. So, the Navigation Acts. This was an act the British designed to keep trade in England and support mercantilism. Colonists could only trade goods with England and no one else. All colonial ships must stop in a British harbor before going to another country. So they was really trying to keep control over trade. And remember, we said mercantilism is when a country felt that they were successful and strong if they were wealthy. One part of the Navigation Act was the Sugar Act. This was created by Parliament, and Parliament is the British government, and they placed a tax on sugar, molasses, and other products shipped to the colonies from England. This tax was created to pay some of Britain's debt. So they said, okay, we have this war debt. We have to figure out how we're going to pay it. So let's put these taxes on things such as sugar and molasses, stuff that we know the colonists they're going to use and need. And they did this without asking the colonists how they felt about it, their input. They didn't ask them anything. So that's where we get the slogan or the quote, no taxation without representation. Because King George said, I'm going to put this tax on here. There's nothing you can do about it. I'm not asking your opinion. No one's from the colonies will be represented. So I don't want to hear from you. So that's where we get no taxation without representation. So again, if you're a colonist, how would you feel if he started putting this tax on sugar or molasses or anything else that you used? Now, the Stamp Act. This was a tax on all documents, newspapers, playing cards, and it forced colonists to place a special stamp on the item. So any printed material had this tax attached to it. Again, created to pay off Britain's war debt. Hey, so the colonists was like, yo, we can't deal with this. This is too much. So let's boycott. Boycott is when it's a form of protest. And it's when you refuse to stop buying something. You might boycott a store. You may not go to the store until changes are made. So the colonists felt that if they boycotted or then buy certain things or use certain products, then King George should take away these acts. And that's what repeal means. So he said, hey, let's boycott. And colonists told King George III that they will boycott all goods from England if he does not repeal the act. And remember, boycott is when you protest. It's a form of protest when you refuse to buy something in order to make a change. And repeal is basically getting something to stop. The Quartering Act. The purpose of the Quartering Act was to keep troops in the colonies and reduce the cost of traveling. Colonists had to keep troops in their homes and also feed them. So at one point, King George, he would send troops over here to keep control. He had troops on the proclamation line to make sure that the colonists didn't go across this line, and basically to keep order. He, again, did not want to pay for them to live in certain places. So if you were a colonist during this time, you would have to share your home with some of these troops. Your parents would have to feed them and take care of them as far as room and board if they were a troop and they needed a place to stay. So this was the Quartering Act, and it was designed to get people, or get colonists, to keep soldiers and troops in their homes. The next is the Townshend Act. This put a tax on goods such as paper, glass, paint, and tea. And this revenue is the money that's made, or tax was raised, would be used to pay the salaries of British officials in the colonies. So they added this extra tax again to benefit the British officials and not the colonists. Again, no taxation without representation. They're putting all these taxes on the colonists without talking to them, seeing how they feel. So keep remembering, no taxation without representation. All right. So again, remember we talked about boycott. So most of the parts of the Townshend Act was repealed, but colonists still smuggled in tea from other places. So they had this thing called the writs of assistance, and this was a search warrant that allowed British officials to search any place or seize anything at any time. So if they felt you were smuggling, you looked like you might be smuggling something, they had the right to search you. They didn't have to have a search warrant. They could just come and search your home, come and search if you had a boat or any type of property. They could come and search your home at any time, because they knew that some of these colonists were smuggling in certain things that they needed. So to protect the British tea merchants, only one colony or one company could sell tea in the colonies, and that was the East India Trading Company. So this should say one company, not one colony, could only trade. So they had this monopoly going on. Remember, we said monopoly is when one person controlled everything. So this East India Trading Company controlled all of the tea, and England owned this trading company. So they had said that you could only get tea from this company, nowhere else. And that's why colonists were smuggling in, because they were in the process of boycotting some of these taxes that England had placed on them. So they're mad, they're upset about this tea tax and everything else that's going on. So they decided to dress as Native Americans and dump $1 million worth of tea into the harbor. This is known as the Boston Tea Party. There was also tea parties around other places as a form of boycotting or protesting. There was one called the Edenton Tea Party, and that was a bunch of women who had a protest. There was also other tea parties where they dumped tea into the harbors and other cities as well, but the most popular one is the Boston Tea Party. The group responsible were the Sons of Liberty. And the Sons of Liberty was a secret organization founded by Samuel Adams, and it was formed to protect the rights of the colonists and to go against British rule. So the secret society said, you know what, we're tired of the way King George III is treating us. Let's get together. Let's figure out how we can boycott some of these things. How can we stand up for ourselves against King George III and the parliaments? As a result of the Boston Tea Party, King George III then put on the Intolerable Acts, or the Coercive Acts. And this was designed to punish the colonists for the Tea Party. So they dumped all this tea into the harbor worth millions of dollars. King George III got upset about it. He gave them another act. Again, not asking them how they feel, but this was a punishment for the colonists. So this said no town meetings were allowed in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, basically, because it happened in Boston, they were the ones who really got this act the worst. It took away some of their liberties. It took away some of their freedoms. It took away some of their rights. And they were also under military rule because of them dumping the tea into the harbor. So they thought by doing this would isolate Massachusetts, but this only strengthened the colonies. And they started saying, you know what, that wasn't fair how you're treating Massachusetts. So we need to do something. We need to come together. We need to figure out a plan to stop King George III from putting all these taxes on us. True, the Boston Tea Party happened in Boston, but this is still affecting us as colonies. So they had this thing called the First Continental Congress, where all the colonists met in Philadelphia to boycott all trade with Britain until the Intolerables Act was repealed. And those are the acts of the American Revolution.